As we grow, we face challenges every day. And for our kids, it seems that they have to build fortitude. They have to build resiliency, as Dr. Kathy says. But when things happen, how do we keep those things from being primary things that distract our kids from really growing? How do hard times not become defining times that cause people to feel like they're just failures? That could be a dark place for many parents, especially as we work with kids in different settings of challenges. How do we keep them from feeling like failures? Dr. Kathy has some important insights on this episode of the Celebrate Kids podcast, the daily segment Facing the Dark. Before we jump into that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Summit Ministries. Summit Ministries does a 2-week worldview intensive camp during the summer. Speakers from around the world that have expertise to give kids courage to face hard times. People like Dr. Kathy go and speak at Summit for kids who are in high school and college. For more on Summit Ministries, visit summitministries.org/celebrate kids. Now let's turn to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, there's a new study using data from over 8,800 high school juniors. It demonstrates that positive childhood experiences significantly reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety and improve life satisfaction. Conversely, a higher number of adverse experiences correlates strongly with poor mental health outcomes. Researchers advocate for preemptive and systemic changes to foster environments that nurture positive childhood experiences and actually mitigate adverse ones. The study was conducted in Canada, and it found that adults with more than 4 adverse childhood experiences are 4 times more likely to experience depression and low life satisfaction, 3 times more likely to experience anxiety, and are 30 times more likely to attempt suicide than people who have had no adverse childhood experiences. Now, Dr. Kathy, I want to ask you a question to start this off, and it's a little bit vulnerable, and I want you to correct me if I need it. But if I don't, maybe praise me. I don't know what you would do then. Maybe I don't know how you kind of would walk down that. But as a dad, there's some natural tendencies that we have to kind of joke with our kids and maybe even pick on them a little bit. And a couple weeks ago, one of my sons had a question. He asked this. He said, "Dad, why do you pick on us sometimes?" And I don't know if this is really a Dr. Kathy approved answer. And I don't know if I'm going to have a job at the end of this podcast. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I told my son that I really want to build confidence in them and that they find their identity in Jesus. And sometimes things happen in life and in the world that people will call out, maybe make a joke of, but that doesn't determine their identity or even the trajectory of their future. This is a really long conversation, and I did use big words with it. But I told them basically that I'm trying to toughen them up a little bit at home so that when they hit the critiques of the world, that they know what to do with them. In essence, I'm working to try to build resiliency for them. To start, I guess I want to hear what your thoughts are on this. Is doing this with kids, maybe joking with them, picking on them a little bit, joshing a little bit, is that a good practice? Especially if we maybe take a step back and explain why we joke with them like that. Because I think that it's helpful to challenge them a little bit, cut their teeth in some ways to build resiliency. What are your thoughts here, and what guidance do you have?
Yeah, I think you still have a job. So let's start there. Yeah, I think this is fine. And I think it's fine for you because I've seen you with your kids and I know that they know that you love them and that the foundation of all of this is love. And the fact that your son could even ask you, "Dad, why do you pick on us sometimes?" Like, what a compliment to you that he could even recognize what was going on and then ask you about it. Now, if some dad is going to pick and only pick on the kid and not be kind and loving and outgoing and positive and affirming at other times, and that's not a good idea. That's critical spirit and that's judgment. And that's going to end up shaming the kid and he's not going to want to be in the same room with his dad. I do think that kids are going to get picked on outside of the home. They're going to be lied to, lied about. They're going to be gossiped about. They're going to be put in a corner and being expected to have an answer to a question. And they're going to have to think quickly on their feet. And we need to parent them for the culture in which we're raising them. And that's the reality that a lot of our kids are being faced with. So yes, I think developing resiliency, obviously the fact that you want them to have an identity in Jesus, which allows them to then reject the liar and the lie from the culture, right? They can stand up and say, well, that's your opinion of me, but it's not true. And then they walk away because you've taught them that they can walk away.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that's really helpful. Thanks for affirming me in this way. You are a great parenting coach. And especially for me, I feel like I get the best job in the world because we get to rub shoulders like this and you can say, well, I wouldn't do that. And this is why. But that was really helpful. And I want to bring that up a
Good.
little bit because I think that there's some negative experiences that really are detrimental, but there might be some challenging experiences like that with our kids that can be beneficial if we walk through them correctly. But in this study, they really talked about how the negative experiences were things that kids experienced without support, without guidance. Things like systemic poverty, where no one really steps in to provide support, or an abusive situation where no one intervenes. When you hear this finding, what does it lead you to think in terms of how building our identity isn't really something that we do solely on our own? Others have to engage it, right?
Identity comes before belonging in the teaching that we do here at the ministry of the 5 core needs. Identity, who am I, and belonging, who wants me, are right next to each other in the pyramid that we build. And we like to say that show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And that's because belonging, our relationships, influences who we become. We hang out with people like I used to have a friend who was very negative and critical, and I had to stop having dinner with her as frequently as I was because she was really bringing me down. I couldn't bring her up, and I was disappointed that I couldn't. But boy, she had the ability to bring me down. I didn't like myself at the end of the dinners, and I had to kind of cut back on when I saw her socially. And I was brave enough to tell her that because I felt like that was the appropriate thing for a friend to do. So it is critically important that we understand that we are in relationships on purpose with purpose. And we can look out and be a blessing to others and offer that kind of support. And certainly, what I thought of as you were sharing this, Wayne, is I just have such admiration for our social workers and our guidance counselors and our therapists and our pastors and our educators and grandparents who have rescued their grandkids, and anyone, moms and dads in general too, of course, who are stepping into situations that they see are unhealthy and say, hey, let me help you stop that and let me rescue you from that. My niece is married to a wonderful guy. One of my nieces, well, both of my nieces are married to wonderful men, and one of them is married to a wonderful guy who was raised just horribly. And when his parents abandoned him, a kid from his school who knew him asked his parents, hey, could he live with us? Now, first of all, the guy that my niece is married to is a fabulous athlete. And this young man wanted him to stay in the school because he was a fabulous football player. So he said to his parents, we don't want him to have to leave. We want him to stay in our school. So could he live with us? And that family brought him in. And those are now his guardians. They legally became his guardians. And they celebrate Christmas and birthdays together as his guardians family because his, blood family just wasn't successful. They just weren't able to manage. And that's, so anybody who's done that, our foster families, but praise the Lord, because the stuff happens, abuse happens, poverty happens, these adverse experiences are real and damaging. And so that's what I'm thinking of as we talk about this today. Praise God for everyone who stepped into the mess.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I want to ask you to close on this topic that there are situations that we run into all the time with this. I don't know if we oftentimes have our eyes open to it, in fact. But if a family or an adult does have their eyes open to a child that's experienced a series of adverse situations, maybe their parent passed away or their family is in an economic downturn, what are the things that we should do to provide support for them so this adverse experience isn't really a defining experience?
Yeah, it's a great question because there is new research. I was just studying when I attended the American Association of Christian Counselors Convention that the adverse experiences do not have to have life-defining implications when there is the rescue in the right way at the right time. So what do we do when we recognize that somebody's in the middle of a mess? Well, I think we listen longer. We say, hey, I'm here for you. We don't assume that we know what they need. Everybody's different. Even people from the same situation are going to need different things. So we don't assume and we say, how can I help you? And we accept it if the answer is quiet or peace or nothing right now. So what do you need? How can I help you? What could I help you understand? I think asking questions is super valuable. Not assuming things would be a blessing. I think staying present, and I, as I say in some of my books, be present in the quiet. Have the courage to sit in the silence. That's a movement. Sit in the silence. You don't have to have answers to all the questions in order to love people. So don't be afraid when you know that somebody's in trouble. You let them know, hey, I see you. And I don't know if there's anything I can do, but I'm sure willing to find out. Do you want to talk to me?
You know, as Dr. Kathy was talking, it reminded me of a passage that comes out of Romans 12, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Don't be conceited. This passage comes from Paul in Romans 12 as an encouragement for those who find themselves really in the grace and the mercy of Jesus, to live as people who are sincere in their love for other people. And as Dr. Kathy was talking about being with people in challenges, it reminded me of this verse that defines what the church looks like in hard times. I think walking and sitting and being with and listening to and sometimes not having the answers that we feel like we should have to fix a problem, but just being willing to maybe associate or walk with somebody hand in hand. And I think walking with people in these situations can be a bright light that shines and cuts through the darkest times. One of the places that we found that does this, that builds resiliency for kids, is Summit Ministries. They brought this episode to you today. They're helping support Celebrate Kids. And we are passionate about the things that happen at Summit. Dr. Kathy speaks at Summit, this 2-week camp for high school and college-age kids, to have an understanding and build a solid conviction that the way that God designed the world really is true. And there's a Bible foundation and scientific reasoning that backs that up. If you'd like your kid to go to Summit or even just to find out more, please visit summitministries.org/celebrate kids. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, I'm so glad you're listening with us this week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.